Thank you for joining us for what is now the third episode of Jake and Peter Talk Typology. My name is Jake. Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm the resident ENFP, and I'm so excited to be back for episode 3. This is exciting.
Yeah, this has got to be like the most consistent production streak that two NE people have ever been on, ever.
That's what I was thinking too. It's so hard to stick to something, but it's pretty impressive. It says something that we're still doing this. This is fun.
Oh, my tab crashed that I was going to use, but I said before we started that I wanted to begin by addressing questions. So we've had some user participation.
That's a great idea, by the way. Thank you for the questions. Keep them coming.
Yeah, thanks for the question. The first question was asked. Well, both of my questions are from enough. So INFPs are winning the user participation race. The first question that I got was from S. Reicht. He said, could you go into details about your personal types in the next episode? If we have time, we can do that. But he says, also, I want to know what you guys think of INFPs because even if I know most of the details already, it's always interesting to see what other folks say about certain types. So I figured, why not give INFP special attention if he's going to. Yes. Why don't you go first, Peter? What's your experience with INFPs?
Oh man, INFPs, I feel like I can relate to them a lot because we share the same functions. You know, they have them shifted down a bit or differently. They lead with introverted feeling and I lead with extroverted intuition. It makes for a very different person if it's an intuitive dominant or a feeling dominant, but I can get along with INFPs very well. I think they're very compassionate people.
Dominant versus feeling dominant, are you saying like INFPs with relatively different development, or are you saying the difference between ENFPs and INFPs?
Oh, just the general difference between the two types. If you lead with feeling, you tend to be a more compassionate, more confrontation avoiding individual than someone who has intuition predominant, for instance. But I think one of the keywords for INFPs is definitely identity or compassion and searching for who they are. They're very subjective in the way that they take in the world. They speak in I think, I feel a lot. They are genuinely very, very friendly people. I think you would agree. They are, especially to their friends. If you're in a relationship with them, it's different, of course, but to their friends, they take a lot of time to make sure that they're feeling well and compassionate towards them.
They can be pretty selective.
They're very selective, yeah. They have to be interested in you as an individual to take that interest in you because they, again, value everything based on their own opinions. And if you share them or you fit in with their interests, then they're going to be very friendly and compassionate to you.
Yeah, for sure. If you have that interest line. I've been dating an INFP for about 5 years.
You have?
That's my girlfriend's type. And I have 2 INFP brothers, one older, one younger. So I've been surrounded by INFPs.
So you're way more qualified to talk about this than I am then. What's been your experiences?
Well, I don't know. I guess I know them more. Obviously, if I have 2 brothers, I was raised with them. And so I know them, obviously, before I knew about typology or anything like that. But there's a lot of similarities between INTPs and INFPs in that we're both introverted judgers. But I find them to be pretty quiet, pretty reserved, a little bit hermited, very close circle of friends and a very small circle of interests. And so in that respect, they can be very easily satisfied by a very small number of things, which is a virtue, in a minimalistic sense. For some people, maybe they might criticize them for being too simple or unambitious or something like that. But once they have those kind of needs being met, they don't really give a hoot in hell about anything else, for better or for worse. They don't concern themselves with the world outside of their world that much. And so for that reason, they don't cause a lot of damage. They don't make a lot of waves. But that's at the same time it's not destructive. It's not harmful to carry on that way.
That's a great way of describing it. And I think we mentioned it on our first hangout that there are certain similarities between the system building in TI and FI in the way that they approach other people, especially, and the limited need for mass appeal isn't as big as in other types, like NE DOMs or extroverted intuition dominance and other types, and TE, especially in extroverted thinking.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if they have any more follow-ups, you know where to reach us, that's right. My second question comes from someone I also believe, I could be wrong, but I also believe is an INFP, MBTI study notes. And she says, I would like to hear your experience with TE and FE dominant people, female and male, and something about functional development, if we can, I guess, sprinkle some of that in. She also has a question for if INTPs use FE when dealing with the external world, or if they think FE is, I think it's both, or if FE and INTPs is immature. I think the answer is yes, it's immature, and yes, INTPs use FE in dealing with the external world for sure. But let's go into the question we can both answer about your experience with TE and FE dominant people, which are the ExxJ types, the ESTJ, ENTJ, ESFJ, and ENFJ types.
Well, my experiences have been that they are very, they are most comfortable when they are in charge of their environment, or they have a say in their environment. Like, they like to impact other people and to make sure that their ideas are heard, and they have to feel like they are making a difference in their social circles and in, for some types, the world, and for others, themselves. Like, an ENTJ is very driven typically towards specific goals in life and needs to feel like every action is guided towards those goals. And yeah, I don't know how have your experience has been.
It's an interesting question because I don't really have I notice a bank of like ready to fire, away with observations, which I usually do on most things, which made me think, I think that there's something to the dynamic of introverted judger with extroverted judger where we're kind of like dancing around each other. It's like a fencing match. So like, it's almost like they can't be, there's something about it preventing both types from being their objective in a vacuum, kind of self. It seems like both of these styles of being have enough influence on the other that it creates a dynamicity and a dynamic. So I would say of all of the types, probably the ENFJ, ENTJ, I probably have most direct experience with. I don't know that many ESFJ types, even though Socionics says that we're supposed to complement very well. We don't seem to run into each other, and our lifestyles don't seem to cross paths very often. But I would say with ENTJs, I like having short conversations. Those are the conversations, they never really do last long. But when they do, they're very interesting conversations to have. I have a couple of people who I have had social or sort of professional conversations or contact with where we have a very interesting conversation. We exchange information and maybe Facebook contacts, but we never really talk again, And I don't think that unless we were caused to be at the same place, we would talk again, because for whatever reason, there's just nothing impelling there. ENFJs, I probably have more consistent friendships with. I can think of two people that are probably ENFJs that I'm pretty good friends with, but that's because we have specific interests that are similar. In one specific case, politics, and so we like to talk about politics. But we don't really talk outside of politics. We just talk about politics mostly, almost exclusively, I'd say.
Right. I've run into ENTJs mostly in professional settings, and they are all about efficient conversations, getting the information out, getting your information. Whenever I think of ENTJs, I think of those schlocky action movies with presidents or businessmen who say, "Cut to the chase. What's this all about?" Just the people coming in and interrupting all the smart people and coming in and saying, "What's going on? Could someone please tell me in English what's going on?" That's what I think when I think ENTJs. It's all about getting the relevant information out and using it in the context that they want to use it. That's the heavy TE for me in ENTJs. And ENFJs, I usually really like ENFJs. I think they're wonderful people, but I get the feeling that they think I'm a touch too odd for them most of the time. The heavy extroverted intuition comes across as very childish to them and very incoherent, I think, which is a shame because I genuinely think that ENFJs are wonderful people that I like to hang out with more.
Yeah, both types, ENFP and ENFJ, are very social types who like to have a big positive impact in social situations, but they are definitely driven by slightly different kinds of things, and they are looking for different kinds of responses out of people.
For sure.
Did you have? I know I threw this on you at like the last kind of minute, but did you have any questions that came through on your side of the broadcast or whatever? Like, what are these podcasts? What do we call these?
What do we call these? Hangouts, podcasts,
hangcasts, podouts.
Podouts is pretty good. Let's let's keep brainstorming. I did a few questions. I'm sorry I didn't catch the names of the people that. Be sure to find out who did after we finished here. Something that I have a feeling that a lot of people are interested in, especially when they just get into MBTI or typology or socionics, is relationships, and not just necessarily romantic relationships, but relationships between other types. Like a lot of people use it on the Facebook quiz thing in UR and ENFP, you should be with an INTJ, for instance. So a lot of people, if you look at the forums and stuff, if you go onto Reddit's subforum for INTJs, you'll find ENFPs saying, "Hey, I'm an ENFP looking for an INTJ." What do you think about that whole mentality of you should be dating this type because you're this type? Do you think opposites attract, or do you think there's something to the dating and relationship side of it?
I think that it's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, just like straight up, it's probably improper to use it that way. But it is valid to take a person's psychology into account when you're dating them, or their personal tendencies. I do think that probably when it comes to personality, it's very rarely gonna make or break anything, but it's a nice thing to navigate around. But other things like cultural background, age, political and religious affiliation, all of that's going to weigh, in my opinion, on the success and failure of a relationship. How much do the families approve? What is the income levels? These things are all, just in my opinion, as much important considerations as the typology and the type compatibility. If you could even say so, I would say that I believe more in type incompatibility than type compatibility. I think it's harder to predict that two people are just going to get along because of some typological, configuration.
That's a good way of putting it. I also think it's way more interesting to look at who you're incompatible with than who you're compatible with, because then you can learn more about why you're incompatible and learn more about yourself and figure that aspect out. That's more interesting to me anyway. But yeah, I think you're right. I think psychology, of course, plays a major role in who you're going to end up with and who you date and who you're friends with. But I think it's also a dangerous pitfall, this whole way of looking at the typological thing, to use it to that means as a way of figuring out who you're going to be spending the rest of your life with. It should more be used for figuring out why people are the way they are, I think. But of course, it makes for a good Facebook quiz. So.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, I've heard some types being together, and I will admit, I'm like, oh, that's doomed. Like, I just can't see some types working together at all.
Yeah, that's very true.
But I like, I'm willing to be proven wrong. I hope I'm proven wrong in any case where I see that going on. There's something to it for sure. The interesting thing, though, is when you do look at all of the material about that kind of stuff on the internet, it doesn't. Some of it completely disagrees with other parts of it, but the justifications are consistent with type theory. So it's clear that some people just think relationships are for different things, and maybe it's like why I don't necessarily see a relationship as something that has to be about personal growth. That doesn't have to be why, or the venue through which you you establish that in your life. It could lie somewhere completely outside of romance. I guess we just don't have that many relationships that are like not working relationships in modern society that aren't sexual, where that dynamic can even be considered, because there's just, we don't really relate to people on an intimate level in our adult life unless we're, dating or planning on having a family together.
That's a good point. I agree. So next question. This is sort of in the same vein, the using MBTI and the Facebook tests. What do you think is the best way to make sure that you are not mistyped? Often someone will come in on our Discord server, for instance, and say, hey, I think I am this type, or come in and say, I am this type, but figure out that they are something else, sometimes weeks or months into being on servers or, reading about the types. What do you think, if you could give a piece of advice on how to make sure that you are not mistyped, what would it be?
I would say that first, the best advice I can give is going to be probably most applicable to people who are similar types as I am. I'll say that first, because I don't think that my answer to the question is very objective, and I don't think that every type could approach it that way and have much success. But for me and my approach, when I feel most confident that someone is the correct type, is when I don't doubt people's types. I assume whatever type they tell me is probably correct. And I know that's wrong sometimes, but it's, sort of innocent until proven guilty is my approach on that one. But if someone has a question about their type, and especially if it happens in like a place like a chat room or a forum or a Facebook page or Facebook group or something like that, I don't say anything at all in that public space, really, but I will direct message them or private message them and talk to them one-on-one. And what I'll do is I'll ask them just a sort of series of questions about typology, and if certain things about certain functions that would be used if they were that type resonate with them, or if they do not resonate with them. And if they do not resonate with them, I'll try to describe it differently. If it still doesn't resonate, I'll describe the other function. If that resonates more, maybe they're mistyped, and that's okay, because I wasn't that anchored in to the first type that they told me they were anyway. I just sort of, took for granted that they're probably right. But yeah, and for me, it's more about personal understanding. It's about knowing that person understands what type theory is saying, and they're sure about that much at least. And then, does that relate to me, and how does it relate to me? If I'm not confident that they know what type theory is or what functions are, or they haven't really explored any other types besides the types that a quiz told them or a test told them or their friend told them, if I'm not confident they've looked much outside of that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to teach them about what typology is saying about people. And then from there we can go into, okay, what could it be saying about your particular situation?
I think that's a great way of going about it. I had a tendency, and I still do this sometimes, of being very blunt or telling people, I don't think you are this type. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it. I think you shouldn't tell people who they are. I think you should be very careful with that, because, over the internet, when we're just speaking or talking or writing with each other, we don't see who they are behind closed doors, or who they really are. So I shouldn't tell people who they are. I think that's something that I'm learning along the way. And I think the private messaging, leading people to information, and then leaving it up to them whether they want to find out or not, is a good way. It can be very frustrating for me when people don't want to learn more. Like if they're very confident that they are something and don't question it, or don't want to learn more about it, that can be very frustrating for me. If I'm convinced someone...
If I'm in a situation where I believe in my mind, I believe somebody is a different type than they believe that they are, that they're saying that they are, and I think all their behavior is inconsistent with their reported type and very consistent with what I think their type is, I will kind of sort of passively and in roundabout ways sort of ask them questions in that public setting that I think would be tells about like this person doesn't use FI or this person's not using FE. Like it's very clear, you know, to me, but I won't out and out say it. I'll try to provoke a situation where that's revealed and obvious, hopefully to that person. And if it's not obvious to that person, it's obvious to anybody else watching the interaction. Probably, I don't know if that's probably more the introverted way of doing things.
Maybe, yeah. It could also be just extroverted thinking, just me being blunt and just saying, no, you are this, or I don't believe you are this more confrontational style of addressing a problem.
Yeah, I will say, even when talking, and I guess this might lead into what the next question is pretty well, when talking to people who use TE about the types of others, some third party, the justifications of, you know, why the TE person or the, you know, a TEFI using person has come to their conclusion versus how I've come to my conclusion are always completely different. There's a definite difference between the way TE and FE is like checking off and cataloging what makes something this and what makes something that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I was just talking with someone about how FE and FI go about typology, and I think FE tends to do it more as a way of navigating the social landscape and navigating people and building a system around people, whereas FI use it more as a self-help tool. Like go about it to look at, okay, how can I improve myself? How can I communicate better with others? And I think that's an interesting perspective to add into it too.
So you said the third question was something about celebrities?
Yes, that is the third question I have. The question is it possible to properly type celebrities when we don't know them personally? One of the first things you'll encounter on the internet if you enter your type is what the type is, you know, what it stands for, and then a bunch of pictures of celebrities that say Goldie Hawn is also this type and Tom Hanks is this type. And do you think that's valid? Do you think people are just guessing? What do you think about it?
Yeah, that's the question about it, is the validity. You know,
yeah.
Certainly, like, you know, there's only 16 types, mathematics, you know, 1 in 16 times, if you just threw a dart, you'd be right about some celebrities and wrong about others, you know, but that doesn't make it a valid way of, you know, determining anything. So yeah, for sure. It's just tough. I try not to argue too much about it when there is a disagreement. I think you and I was thinking about this. I believe you and I have talked about Bill Burr, and we disagree on Bill Burr, you and me in particular. But you know, without going into it. And so you and I just don't agree on Bill Burr. On other issues where we initially disagreed on Trump over whether or not he was an ESFP and ESTP, and anybody who disagrees who's watching this, please tell us why you disagree if you don't think he's either one of those types.
Yeah, what do you guys think those two people are, Bill Burr and Donald Trump?
Yeah, I went from ESFP to Donald Trump over to your position, ESTP. I became more convinced that you're probably right. He is more likely exhibiting FE rather than TE underneath that SE. So I think, you know, it's fun to talk about, but I will say this: I think a lot of times people have a public face and a public persona that's very carefully constructed and very carefully manicured. Especially if this person writes books for a living or is an actor or anything like that, where their income would be hurt by bad press. You can better be sure you're not getting the complete picture of who they are as a person.
Exactly.
You know? And so but you can still, in my mind, keep that in mind and still type people, you know, knowing that they're gonna, because the false kind of persona, the way that Donald Trump, for instance, thinks that he will impress people is different than the way Stephen Colbert thinks that he will impress people. And so they do different things in public to be impressive. And that is a window into psychology as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I clearly remember when Stephen Colbert did the MBTI test and shocked the world by saying he was an INFP. I mean, I don't think anyone had guessed that he was an INFP, but that is just, I think, to my point, that we can only estimate and guess based off of what we know from the typology writings and socionics and what the MBTI Foundation has said. There's really no real way of knowing without knowing a person personally, I think, but it's still a fun experiment.
Yeah, if the person who is a celebrity in question explicitly stated their type, that's one thing. Like Golenko and Socionics and Kierzy on the Western, you know, Jungian side of things, both identified themselves as INTPs. So we're there, you know. So did Jung, but we're not going to get into that argument. But my point is, but I still think it's a fun exercise. One thing that will frustrate me, though, as like an NE tangent, and I don't like at all, is fictional characters. I actually, it's a particular pet peeve of mine when people start getting into arguments over the types of fictional characters, especially if the author does not explicitly state that they know anything about Carl Jung or typology or anything like that. It's not that archetypes can't form. Absolutely. In psychologically naive scenarios, we would actually expect lots of typical behavior. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a fictional character has enough development and consistency of development where you could even, where it's worth arguing over. It's very unlikely to be worth arguing over.
Also, it's very rarely just a single person writing all of the information, especially in today's media, where you have TV shows and movies, which are written by 10 people all at once, and the writers of this season are very different from the writers 3 seasons ago. So they're going to add something else to a character. So you could argue perhaps that Pam from The Office is an ISFJ because she did this in season 1 and 2, or an INFP because she did this in season 5. And it's kind of silly. I don't. It's written by people who most of them don't care about typology and write based off of their own experiences or how they have dealt with situations. So that can definitely bug me too, especially when people get into very deep discussions about how wrong people are for saying that Pam is definitely an INFJ. She's definitely not an INFP. That bugs me too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, and I get the people who might fire back and say, well, sometimes the character is based on a real person and that real person has a type. That doesn't necessarily mean the author's good at translating that faithfully.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's I was going to say, and we are over 20 minutes, so I think it'd be maybe the users solved all of our topical problems for today. But I want to end on one point. Music. How about music? I think music is actually a pretty good. I go by music as far as performances go as a stronger indicator personally of functions and type. Keeping in mind what you said earlier, let's make sure that the person singing the song and the songwriter are the same person, or that you know who the songwriter is across multiple songs. And I think, but in songwriting and music, and even instrumentation and sound design, I think that typology shows itself.
That's a very good point. Music is definitely a tell for me, I think, too, of people's types, just because I love music so much, and I can kind of in my mind hear what would appeal to the different types. And I know if someone is a big fan of Snoop Dogg or special artists, then they might be more on the.
You have an opinion on Snoop? Yeah, I was about to go into. What's your opinion on Snoop?
Yeah, yeah. Anyways, but yeah.
Do you think Snoop appeals to what? TEFE, NESE,
SE?
I could get that. I'll have to go back to some of his stuff and re-examine with a typological ear.
No, but there's definitely the Bruno Mars FE type music, and the more, Radiohead, The Cure, more experimental, sonically FI, self-examination music that I think you once said that you haven't met a single introverted feeler who didn't like Radiohead, and that's a great point. And that is.
He does seem very popular. He does seem very popular with the ENFPs. Yeah, and they don't. Well, yeah, I think also, you can also tell how many FI people like a band by how pissed off they get when you talk shit about them.
Yes, that's very true. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up before it gets too long, because we're probably close to about 25 minutes. I actually started the timer late. We're probably a little bit longer than 5 minutes, but whatever. Thank you again.
We can talk more about music or something next time, or movies, or that would be fun.
Yeah, maybe we should pick out some specific examples, start some fights in the comment section. But thank you also for, I guess we got to thank the people who made this episode happen, because they ended up taking all our time, but in a good way. So thanks for the 5 questions from all of our commenters. And if you guys have any more questions, we'll definitely try to address them in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is always a blast, and keep the comments going. Keep the questions coming. Remember to check out my channel and Jake's channel. I have some videos coming up that I'm very excited about, and I'm sure that Jake does as well. So thank you so much.
I should actually do something. It's always good to to commit to doing something in public. So yeah, I'll do something too.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to throw you under the bus. Like that was lame.
I can come with something. I haven't done a typology video, actually, just me and the camera. So maybe I'll commit to doing that at least once this week before, or somewhere between the next time you and I talk. But thanks for joining me, Peter, and can't wait to talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.